Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results.
Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. My name is John Pieranunzi, and this is the opening swing. Let's begin today like we always do with our news. Okay, today overnight we had an Australian rate decision, came out in line. German balance of trade, also reasonably in line. And some other smaller numbers out of Germany. Nothing else that material. Getting into the U.S., still not a bunch. Some announcements out of Treasury land. Kashkari speaks at 11:30. I'm not aware right now if there's a Q&A or if anything will be released. Then we have a 3-year note auction at 1, consumer credit at 3. So still reasonably light today. Let's take a look at some charts. We'll check in with our monthly chart quickly here. So the monthly chart, the big thing that we were discussing on this chart, just reiterating the higher time frame, trend higher, and then a move to potential balance as this time framing is broken and we've held the April lows. The 5150s are the midpoint of this monthly candle. We were trading there yesterday and we have pushed higher. The buyers have been able to push us above the midline of April, up above into the 5100 area. So this has switched from price discovery higher to balance, and we're wondering if potentially this could be turned into balance with an upward skew, which for me would mean holding above the 5150 region. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's go to the weekly. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. You guys are doing great. So here's our weekly chart. This chart has sort of shifted bullish, more bullish a little bit more. We see the monthly went into balance, while the weekly shifted into price discovery lower, balance with this inside candle, and then we've started to push above the prior week's high and leave higher lows. So on the weekly, it's a little bit more bullish. Key for me here on this weekly chart is the fact that to be aware of, we've left behind 2 weekly settles, the 5103 and 3/4 down in this region. After we put in the low, we left that settle, and now our prior weekly settle in this area, which is, I believe, the 54 3/4 we've left behind. So that's very important for this whole week, the fact that that weekly settle is held. Let's go to our daily chart. All right, here's our daily chart of the S&P 500 full session candles. On this chart, we've been over this a lot. This retracement is all of the April range. I was mentioning these 5150 region is the midpoint, and it's also the balance high of the area that we just pushed higher. So that's something we're aware of. Also in this area, I talked a lot about this structure, which I saw as the first, like a strong push lower, but then above it, we kind of made a rounded top and fell back in, and the selling accelerated in this area. So for me, this area suggests that there is selling interest in this area, or at least there was. It can be defeated, but the last time we were here, we saw selling pressure. So until it's proven otherwise, I will assume that there's some selling pressure in here, but we could reach the whole way up to the top of this balance before it shows itself because we are drifting higher. So the key thing for me to highlight on this chart today is our break above our balance, which for me, I'm looking at the high as like the 54 to 67 region as our balance high, which includes the midpoint of April and our naked weekly settle. And now we're in this area. So this is the important area. Right up here around the low 30s area, we have an HVN. And I have my target for continued excursion up here. The next target area would be that area, the low 30s, really the 28s to 36s, and above that I'd be looking for the 50s. So those are the areas I'm interested in up here. Let's go to a lower time frame chart. Okay, here, this is a 4-hour chart. The time frame on this chart keeps getting bigger because we keep wanting to see more action from further back. But here we're just kind of reiterating what we saw on the daily, which is our our balance, our attempt to make a rounded top. This is an attempt, and we broke through this rounded top. So when I see that, I always kind of like look at the area we broke out from as potential support on retest, and that is our balance high region. So I am looking at that area as potential support on any retests. Up here we see I've highlighted the 28s to the 56s, which is the area that I would target on excursion higher. We can see how this is where the selling really came in and forced things lower. Tried again here and then attempted to hold above, but this area kind of ended up not as support. Well, it initially was, but sellers still prevailed. So this is the area that would be a target for me on continued excursion higher. Let's go to a PNF chart and talk about price action. Okay, here's our PNF chart. And let's discuss some price action. We'll start with bullish ideas. Excuse me. Okay, so for excursion higher, we have this clear LVN left from yesterday. So that would be the first line of defense for, it's a terrible line. This would be the first line of defense for the buyers. So if this area, the 5200s holds, what we could see, and I'm not necessarily expecting this, but we could easily get it. But this would be the most aggressive bullish scenario that just where the 5200s hold or are quickly rejected for a take of those 13 quarters. If we get a shallower pullback, I would be more expecting this to round if the pullback is shallower. I could be totally wrong, but I'll just say that that's what I could see that happening. A shallower pullback to here, pushes just above these and kind of starts this, one of these type of things that maybe gets up to the 28 halves. But as long as if we stay above century and we are able to make continued higher highs, this would be some price action that I would look for and potentially some possibilities to target the overnight high and maybe 28s if we see something like this. However, as I spoke yesterday, action like this would be vulnerable to a deeper pullback. This to me is it's like a game of musical chairs. As long as the music's playing, you're still getting long. As long as there's a seat to take, the seat to take is a new high. But as soon as that music stops, we can see a deeper pullback. So be aware of that. But anyway, that would be if we get a shallow pullback and a grind. We could also easily get a shallow pullback and just a squirt higher. If we get like no pullback and a squirt higher, I would look for potentially a deeper pullback that still kind of respects the overnight VPOC, potentially overnight levels. So a more aggressive early move, something of a pullback, and then continuation that breaches this high would then that would lead me to think that there's another spurt of buying. If we get an immediate pullback that continues, that would have me thinking that there's more buying and that I should maybe trade for the 28s and 36s. And then maybe we see kind of this action start to happen up in here, pressing for the 50s. So that's another possibility for how this could happen if it's a little bit more aggressive. Okay, what happens if we get a deeper pullback? So if we get a deeper pullback that gets into these 88s, 90s, really this HVN area, this whole region, I'm expecting this to be support if it's tested on the initial test. So we could obviously get something that pulls back deeply into here, tests, finds support, and quickly gets up above settlement. So if we get a test into here, they can then quickly get back above the O's and hold above O's, then it's back to the bullish ideas without, in whatever shape that could take. If we get a quick rejection above, that's how we could get this pullback. That's one way. Alternatively, the thing to watch out for is if we get this pullback, shows support, and then we don't make a new high and settlement starts shutting off the trade. If we get this, pulls back, shows support, settlement shuts off the trade, then we're looking at either potentially a tightening which would be hands off for me until it breaks. So that's what could happen. We could tighten, and then really we could break either way. Or we could see a kind of a sloppy downtrend start to happen that pushes into this area. If we see that, then what we need to be attentive to is these lower highs in this area of support, because we could see this happen, and one of two things could happen. Either A, we could get the impulse that breaks this trend of highs, gets back into settle. Again, same thing, push into the support and then an impulse that gets back into here, then we're bullish again. But if we see a series of lower highs into this area that does not do that, then what we could see instead is the beginning of our bearish scenarios, which could just kind of start to fail lower and drop. If we break yesterday's low and then we cannot get above this area, again, really the 90s to century, if we break yesterday's low and can't get above this, then I would start to think that we could see some excursion lower. And below yesterday's low, the next key target would be the 67s. All of these areas, like I said, down to 54, I would look at as support on the initial test. Really, the 54s into the 41s. So this makes it a little trickier because to trade the short, I mean, you can trade the short, but you have to be aware that at least for me, I'm expecting some support at each one of these areas. Just so for me, like trading the short today, if it's doing this, I would probably trade the short without a runner, and I would just target and expect. I would just target areas and expect pullbacks to be deeper, and then try to get back on board if we get action like this. And I would be targeting 54s, and I would expect support at 54s on the initial test. So any pullbacks above 54s, any pullbacks that leave the prior week's settle open would be vulnerable to rallies, in my opinion. Now, what happens if we instead, another way this could happen is this area could end up becoming meaningful above century. What we could basically see is something very early. This could happen pre-open. If this happens pre-open, it'd be a little more interesting. An attempt, then a drop. And then we open in here. If we open in this area, it could get really messy. But if we open in this area, and like I said, again, we're vulnerable to a rally, but we could also fail to get settlement or hold. If we fail to get settlement or hold settlement, then I'm definitely going to look for some excursion lower. And the key target in that event, if we open and we can't get settlement and we're failing at the overnight high, then I would expect some auctioning lower. I would still expect support ahead of yesterday's low. Like that all could happen, but we could fall through as well. But anyway, support anywhere down to here. If we should happen to break this area today, let's go over that because that's a possibility. I'm not necessarily expecting it, but we could. But like I said, the key target on any excursion, below this region, really yesterday's low, the key target is the 54 region. I would expect support on the initial push. If we start breaking yesterday's, if we somehow get into the naked weekly settle today and start going lower, I'll be honest with you, I'll be looking for this 37 to 40 region, but I'm not really expecting excursion below that today. That's not what I'm expecting. But it easily could happen. And if it does, I will be using the convergence zones, which I use as my targets, and likely these 26s, 25 to 26s, that area again, we know these areas as the next key target, but also we could see support here. But basically, I think if we get back into this region at all, there's going to be support and it could get choppy. That's what I'm seeing today. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing today. I think we went over everything. We went over ideas for bullish ideas that hold the 5200, bullish ideas that hold this area. We went over our targets above, up here, and we went over some ideas for if we get some excursion below here. So I think we're pretty covered today. Good stuff. Okay, I had a bit of a late start, so I'm a little behind, but I'm gonna wrap it here because again we're going long. But all right, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope that you find a way to improve your trading today. Just be a little bit better than you were yesterday. As always, I hope that you find a way to make other people smile today because that's the best thing you can do each day, and that's really what makes happiness. And so everything's done. Let's get out there and clock some ticks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.